She walked out of the Moretti estate with one suitcase and no tears. 5 years. That was how long Evelyn Prescott stood beside Luca Moretti, the most feared mafia boss on the eastern seaboard, while his family treated her like dirt they couldn't scrape off their shoes. Tonight, in front of politicians, billionaires, and killers dressed in tuxedos, they finally finished the job. Publicly, deliberately. With Luca watching and saying nothing. But as the iron gates closed behind her and the storm swallowed her whole, her phone rang. Her father's jet had just landed in Manhattan. And for the first time all night, she smiled. If you want to know what happens when the woman they threw away turns out to own the world they borrowed from, stay until the end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had been building over Lake Tahoe since mid-afternoon, the kind of weather that arrives like a warning nobody listens to. By 9 o'clock, it had turned savage. Rain came sideways off the water, hammering the cliffside estate with a violence that rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows and made the candles on the outdoor terraces gutter and die one by one. Inside the Moretti compound, none of that mattered. The chandeliers burned bright. The champagne flowed cold. The music played on, a string quartet positioned in the corner of the grand entrance hall, their bows moving with mechanical precision through something classical and expensive that nobody was actually listening to. Evelyn Prescott stood near the base of the main staircase and watched the room the way she had trained herself to watch rooms. Quietly. Completely. Taking inventory without appearing to. She counted 43 guests. She knew the names of 31 and the business interests of 26. She recognized the 2 senators near the fireplace, one of whom had shaken her hand warmly at a function in Washington 8 months ago and now looked directly through her as though she were part of the wallpaper. She saw the 3 men from the Falcone operation standing near the bar, drinking too fast, their eyes moving to Luca every 90 seconds the way nervous men always check their compass. She saw Vivian Moretti positioned at the center of the room, like a woman who had spent 60 years making sure every room understood she was its center. And she saw Luca. He stood near the arched doorway that opened onto the main corridor, a crystal glass of scotch in one hand, his jaw set at the particular angle that meant he had already decided something and was simply waiting for the moment to execute it. He was wearing the dark navy suit she had picked out for him 2 months ago for a dinner in Milan. He still hadn't noticed that. Or if he hadn't said so. That was fine. She had stopped keeping score of the small things 3 years ago, when she realized the small things were just the large things in disguise. Evelyn smoothed the front of her dress, black, understated, the kind of garment that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but announced nothing about itself. And she lifted her glass of sparkling water and took a slow sip and waited. She was good at waiting. She had always been good at it. Her father had taught her that the person who controls their patience controls the room, and Charles Prescott was a man who had never once in his life allowed anyone else to set the tempo of a negotiation. She had not spoken to her father in 4 years. She did not allow herself to think about that now. Vivian Moretti broke from the center of the room and moved toward her with the kind of deliberate, unhurried stride that aristocratic women use when they want you to understand that your discomfort is scheduled. She was 63, silver-haired, dressed in deep burgundy, and she carried herself with the particular brand of cruelty that gets passed off as elegance when there's enough money behind it. 2 of her daughters-in-law flanked her at a distance, close enough to witness, far enough to claim they weren't involved. Evelyn set her glass down on a passing server's tray and turned to face her. Vivian. Evelyn. Vivian stopped 2 feet away and looked her over the way customs agents inspect luggage they already intend to open. You look tired. I'm fine, thank you. Are you? It wasn't a question. You've looked tired for some time, actually. I've been meaning to say something. The string quartet shifted into something slower. Across the room, a cluster of guests glanced over Suk. Not obviously, but she caught the peripheral movement, the way eyes move toward a fire while pretending to look at something else. I'm sure you have, Evelyn said. Vivian's expression didn't change. That was the thing about women like her. They had refined the delivery of damage to such a degree that the weapon was invisible until after the wound. Luca has made a decision, she said. I wanted you to hear it in a setting where there are people around. I thought it might be easier. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. Not surprise. Not quite. More like the specific sensation of watching a thing you have seen coming for a long time finally arrive at the door. Has he? He has. Vivian reached into the small clutch she carried and produced a folded document, legal-sized, cream-colored, thick with the particular weight of formal paperwork. She held it out without ceremony. The attorneys finalized everything this afternoon. Luca signed this morning. The room had shifted its attention now, not all at once, but steadily, the way water finds a drain. The senators near the fireplace had stopped their conversation. The men from the Falcone operation were still. Even the string quartet seemed to soften imperceptibly, as though the musicians had sensed something and adjusted accordingly. Evelyn did not take the document immediately. She looked at Vivian's face, at the controlled satisfaction sitting just below the surface of that carefully maintained composure, and she breathed in slowly through her nose and made herself count to 3. Then she took the papers. She did not open them. She already knew what they said. She had known for months that this was coming, had read the language shifting, the warmth draining out, the silences growing longer and heavier between her and Luca, until the space between them in a room felt like something physical you could press your hand against. She had known, and she had not left, because leaving would have meant admitting the last 5 years were a calculation that didn't balance, and she was not yet ready to admit that. She was ready now. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even. It cost her something to make it even, but she paid it. Vivian blinked. Whatever reaction she had been expecting, tears, protest, the particular fragility of a woman caught without her armor, this wasn't it. The satisfaction in her expression flickered uncertainly. "You should take time to review." "I said thank you, Vivian." She folded the document once and tucked it under her arm and turned and walked toward the main entrance. She did not rush. She did not look back at Luca, though she felt him watching from across the room with the particular stillness of a man who has done something he already knows he cannot undo. She did not look at the senators or the men from the Falcone operation or any of the 43 guests who were now watching her cross that marble floor in silence. She walked to the entrance hall. She took her coat from the attendant who stood stiff and wide-eyed near the door. She picked up the single suitcase she had packed that morning, because she had known and she had packed, and she walked out through the front door and into the storm. The rain hit her immediately, cold, hard, merciless. It soaked through her coat in seconds and plastered her hair flat against her face and filled her shoes within the first 10 steps down the stone path toward the gate. She kept walking. The iron gates parted for her automatically, some sensor reading her departure the way a building reads a body, leaving. And she passed through them and stood on the road beyond the estate wall, and the gate swung shut behind her with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She stood there in the dark and the rain. The Moretti estate blazed with light behind her, the party continuing inside, the music going on, the powerful and the terrible drinking their expensive liquor and pulling apart her exit with the quiet relish of people who feed on other people's worst moments. And then her phone rang. She pulled it from her coat pocket. The screen was already wet, the glass blurring the display, but she could see the name clearly. Harrison. Harrison Voss was her father's chief of staff, the man who had worked beside Charles Prescott for 22 years and served as the primary contact point for every significant communication that came out of Prescott Capital. He was the person her father sent when the message needed to arrive without ambiguity. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Miss Prescott." His voice was measured and precise, the way it always was, the way she remembered it from years ago when she was still part of that world. "I'm calling to inform you that your father's aircraft landed at Teterboro 40 minutes ago. He's at the Park Avenue residence. He's asking if you need transportation arranged." She stood in the rain on the dark road outside the Moretti estate with one suitcase and divorce papers under her arm. "Yes," she said, "arrange transportation. Of course. There will be an SUV at your location in approximately 20 minutes. She hung up. She put the phone back in her pocket. She stood still in the downpour and let the rain do what it wanted with her for a moment, because she was alone and there was no one to perform composure for, and she needed a second to feel the full weight of what had just happened before she put it somewhere she could carry it. 5 years. She breathed in. She breathed out. Then she straightened her spine, tucked the suitcase handle more firmly in her grip, and walked to the edge of the road to wait. And she was smiling. Not because she was happy, not yet, but because the fear, the low, grinding fear she had carried for months about what her life would look like on the other side of this, was gone. Just gone. like a frequency that had been running beneath everything suddenly cutting out, and the silence left behind was clean. She knew what came next. She had always known what came next. The SUV arrived in 18 minutes. Black, unmarked, the driver stepping out without a word to take her suitcase and open the rear door. She climbed in. The leather seats were warm and the rain was shut out, and she looked through the tinted window at the glow of the Moretti estate receding as the vehicle pulled away. She did not look long. She opened her coat pocket and retrieved the divorce papers and unfolded them across her lap and read them properly this time, with attention, the way her father had taught her to read every document, hunting for what was missing rather than noting what was there. The settlement terms were what she expected. Modest by any reasonable standard, insultingly modest given 5 years and the specific nature of her contributions to the Moretti organization. Contributions that were not documented anywhere because that had been the arrangement, because she had agreed to that invisibility because she loved him and because she was a fool. She found the clause on page 4 that attempted to bind her to a non-disclosure agreement regarding unspecified business activities during the marriage. She read it twice. She folded the papers back up and set them on the seat beside her and stared at the dark road ahead. The attorney who drafted that clause had made an assumption. He had assumed she would be grateful for whatever she was given, that she would sign without reading carefully, that she was what the Moretti family had always taken her to be. A woman without resources of her own, wholly dependent on the name she had married into, eager to cause no disruption in her departure. It was a reasonable assumption to make about the woman they thought she was. It was spectacularly wrong about the woman she actually was. No. Charles Prescott's Park Avenue residence occupied 3 floors of a building that did not advertise itself. The lobby had no art, no statement furniture, no performance of wealth, just dark marble and low lighting and a security desk staffed by 2 men who were obviously something more than security guards. The elevator required a code and a key simultaneously. When the doors opened onto the private floor, 2 more men were waiting in the corridor. And they stepped aside when they saw her without being asked. She had grown up around men like that. She had forgotten how quickly she read them. The main living space was enormous and dark, except for the lamps that burned near the seating area at the far end, where Charles Prescott sat in a leather chair with a glass of bourbon on the table beside him and a stack of documents in his lap and his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead the way he always wore them when he was thinking and not yet reading. He was 71 years old. He was still one of the most physically imposing men she had ever seen, broad-shouldered, iron-haired, with hands that looked like they had been built for a different, harder century. He did not stand when she came in. He looked up from his documents and he looked at her, wet, coatless, carrying nothing. And his expression did not change, but something moved in his eyes that she recognized even after 4 years. "You're soaked," he said. "It's raining. Sit down." She sat in the chair across from him, and she did not attempt any of the things she might have attempted. No explanation, no apology, no preamble. He would not want any of that. He had never wanted any of that. "The car was waiting," she said. "How long have you known?" "About tonight? 3 days." He picked up his bourbon and considered it. "About the marriage in general?" He almost smiled, and it was not a warm expression. "Longer." She absorbed that. "You didn't reach out. You didn't want me to." That was fair. That was completely fair. 4 years ago, when she had chosen Luca over the life her father had mapped out for her, she had made that choice with full knowledge of what it cost. She had walked away from Prescott Capital, from the inheritance, from the carefully constructed trajectory her father had spent 20 years designing, and she had told him directly that she didn't need his world, that she had found something he couldn't give her, that she was going to build something of her own. He had looked at her with the expression of a man watching someone walk into a room that locks from the outside, and he had said nothing, because Charles Prescott did not argue with decisions already made. He simply waited. He had been waiting 4 years. "I need a lawyer," she said, "not a family lawyer, a firm that specializes in dissolution agreements and NDA challenges. You'll have one by 9 tomorrow morning. I also need—" She stopped. She looked at her father and she felt something she hadn't expected, something that pushed up from under the composure and the anger and the careful management of this entire night. She breathed through it. "I need to know if the offer still stands." Charles Prescott set his bourbon down. He took his reading glasses off his forehead and folded them carefully and placed them on the table beside the glass. He looked at her with the particular attention he reserved for things that mattered to him. "Which offer?" he said. He knew which offer. She knew he knew. "The one you made me 4 years ago, before I left." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Charles Prescott was a man who never used silence accidentally. "You would take the position," he said. "The full position. Not an advisory role, not a consultancy. You would come back as my successor, take the seat. Build the next generation of the portfolio. Everything." "Yes." "That means becoming visible, Evelyn, publicly. The Prescott name in front of the Moretti name. There will be exposure. People will ask questions about the marriage, about your time inside the organization." "Let them ask." He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once, the way he nodded at decisions that were final. "Then welcome back," he said. "We have work to do." She leaned forward and picked up his bourbon and finished it, and he let her, and neither of them said anything about the 4 years in between, because that was not how either of them had ever handled things. And some things do not require words if the actions around them are clear enough. She did not sleep that night. She showered and changed into clothes that the household staff had somehow already prepared. She didn't ask how they knew her sizes. She had the sense that Harrison had been thorough. And she sat at the desk in the guest suite that was not really a guest suite, that was quite clearly a suite that had been kept ready for her. And she opened her laptop and she started working. The NDA clause was the first problem. She pulled up the document and photographed each page and sent the images to 3 different attorneys she still had contact numbers for from her previous life. Not the attorneys her father would provide in the morning, but her own people. The ones she had cultivated quietly during the marriage for reasons she had not entirely admitted to herself at the time. Contingency planning. She had been doing it for 2 years. The second problem was the financial architecture. She opened a secure document she had been building in pieces over the past 8 months. A comprehensive map of every legitimate business front she had helped design and implement during her marriage to Luca. Hotels in 4 cities. 2 logistics companies. A real estate investment vehicle registered in Delaware. A private equity structure with shell companies threaded through it like a nervous system. She had built all of it. She had the original blueprints in her head and in encrypted files that the Moretti attorneys did not know existed. She was not going to use them to attack Luca. That was not the plan. The plan was simply to ensure that if anyone, attempted to use the NDA to silence her, she had enough material to make that silence untenable. Mutually assured disclosure. It was the only kind of protection that actually worked. She worked until 4 in the morning. At some point, someone left a tray outside the suite door. Coffee, something to eat. She drank the coffee and ignored the food and kept working. By the time the sky outside started graying toward dawn, she had a framework. It wasn't complete. There were pieces missing. Contacts she needed to reestablish. Relationships that had gone cold during the marriage that she would need to warm up again carefully. A public profile that would need to be constructed almost from scratch because she had spent 5 years deliberately maintaining invisibility. That was going to be the strange part. Not rebuilding the power that she understood. She knew how it worked. She had been inside it her whole life, even when she was pretending not to be. The strange part was going to be letting herself be seen. She was very good at being invisible. She was not sure yet who she was when people could see her clearly. She closed the laptop as full light came through the curtains, and she sat for a moment in the quiet of the morning with her hands flat on the desk, and she thought about Luca. Not with anger, not anymore, or at least not the hot, immediate kind. The anger had burned through in the rain outside the estate, and what was left was something colder and more useful. She thought about the specific look on his face when she crossed the marble floor toward the exit. She had not looked at him directly, but she had felt his gaze the way you feel heat from something you're not facing. And she had read what was in it with the precision of 5 years of learning exactly how he watched things. He hadn't known she would leave without a word. He had expected something. Tears, a confrontation, some version of the scene that would make the exit feel like an ending he controlled. He had arranged the whole thing to be a controlled ending. His mother, the guests, the documentation delivered in public. It was all staging. And Luca Moretti had a director's instinct for staging. He had wanted a final act that looked like his decision. She had walked out before the curtain fell. He would not understand that for days. And when he did understand it, when he started to understand all of it, her father, the name, the weight of what the Prescott connection actually meant for his financial infrastructure, she would not be there to see his face. She would be here, in this office, building something that didn't need his reaction to be real. That was the thing about power that Luca had never truly understood, even after everything she had tried to show him. Real power doesn't need an audience. She stood up from the desk and stretched and went to the window and looked out at Park Avenue in the gray morning light. The city was already moving. Trucks, early pedestrians, the low hum of infrastructure grinding back into motion for another day. She pressed her fingers lightly against the glass. Somewhere across this city, Luca Moretti was waking up in the Lake Tahoe estate. Or perhaps he had driven back overnight, the way he sometimes did when something was pressing on him, sitting in the back of his car while the landscape moved past and his mind worked over whatever problem had installed itself. She wondered if he had slept. She wondered if the thing pressing on him yet was anything more than the logistics, the financial adjustments, the political repositioning, the story to manage for the syndicate. She wondered if he had thought of her once. She let the wondering go. It was a useless thing to carry. Harrison Voss arrived at 8:15 with 2 attorneys, a communications strategist, and a woman named Diana Reese who turned out to be the head of Prescott Capital's private intelligence division, a part of the organization whose existence Evelyn had known about from childhood, but whose operations she had only partially understood. Diana was 50, small, precise, with the kind of stillness that people develop when they spend their careers knowing things they cannot say in rooms where they cannot control who's listening. They sat around the long table in her father's study, and Charles Prescott did not lead the meeting. He sat at the end of the table and drank his coffee and watched, and Evelyn sat at the other end and led it herself, because that was the arrangement, spoken without being spoken. The NDA issue was resolved in concept within 20 minutes. The clause was unenforceable, given the circumstances of the disclosure and the coercive conditions under which the broader settlement had been presented. The attorneys were confident. Good. The question of the Prescott Capital succession announcement required more discussion. The communications strategist, a man named Garrett, who had the energy of someone who had been awake for 30 hours and considered this normal, laid out 3 possible approaches ranging from quiet integration to full public declaration. Evelyn listened to all 3 and rejected them all and laid out a 4th that was not on his list, and she watched him recalibrate in real time, his pen moving across his notepad faster than he'd been writing before. It was Diana Reese who raised the matter of the Winter Legacy Gala. "The annual charitable event," she said, setting a folder on the table. "It's been a Prescott tradition for 11 years. This year's event is scheduled for 3 weeks from Saturday. Normally, we'd be in the late planning stages. Given the circumstances, it becomes a natural platform." Evelyn looked at the folder. She did not open it. "Who's on the current guest list?" Diana's expression did not change. "Everyone?" she said simply. Evelyn understood. Politicians, financial leaders, industry executives, the full range of legitimately powerful people who kept the social calendar of New York's upper tier. And because the Moretti organization had spent 5 years building legitimate connections through structures she had designed, there would also be people on that list with ties to Luca. People who would be watching. People who would carry back every detail of what they saw. "Keep the date," Evelyn said. "Expand the guest list by 30%. I want to review it personally." "And the announcement?" She looked at the folder again. She thought about the marble floor and the string quartet, and Vivian Moretti's face and the iron gates closing with that period at the end of a sentence sound, and she felt the cold anger settle into something clear and purposeful in her chest. "The gala," she said. "We make the announcement at the gala." The room processed that. Harrison Voss made a note. The attorneys exchanged a glance. Garrett wrote something and underlined it twice. Diana Reese allowed herself a small expression that was not quite a smile. Charles Prescott, at the far end of the table, said nothing. He set down his coffee cup. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time in 4 years, he looked like a man who had been waiting for something and had finally seen it arrive. 3 days after the divorce papers were served at the Moretti estate, the first photographs appeared. Nobody was certain who took them or who released them, though Evelyn had her suspicions. She suspected Diana Reese, though she asked no questions and Diana offered no explanations, because that was how that particular arrangement worked. The photograph showed Evelyn arriving at Prescott Tower in a black SUV, stepping out in a charcoal coat with her hair up and her posture carrying the specific weight of someone who was not arriving at a place but returning to one. The security detail visible around her was not subtle. The men flanking her as she walked through the tower entrance were the kind of men who communicated something clearly without needing to say anything. Social media caught the images first, then financial press, then mainstream outlets. The comments were immediate and loud and confused. Who was Evelyn Prescott? The name Moretti was searchable. Luca Moretti had enough of a public profile through legitimate business channels that his face and name were findable. His marriage was known, if not widely publicized. His recent divorce was a rumor that became a confirmed rumor that became confirmed fact within 48 hours of those photographs appearing. But Evelyn Prescott, the full weight of that name, what it attached to, what it meant in the architecture of American finance, that took another day to surface properly. When it did, the financial press had the clearest version of it. Evelyn Prescott, only daughter and sole heir of Charles Prescott, founder and chairman of Prescott Capital, one of the 10 largest private financial institutions in the United States. A man whose investment reach touched infrastructure, energy, technology, and political financing across 6 continents, had apparently spent the last 5 years married to a mafia boss while maintaining near total anonymity regarding her own identity. The story was oxygen to a fire. Evelyn read the coverage from her office on the 42nd floor of Prescott Tower. Her office now, the one that had been kept ready for her, though nobody said so explicitly. And she read it without expression and forwarded 3 specific pieces to Garrett's team with annotations about tone and factual corrections, and she did not respond to interview requests or issue any statements, because the story was already doing what it needed to do without her help. She knew the moment Luca found out. Not because she was watching for it, she had made a decision not to actively monitor anything coming out of the Moretti organization, because that was attention she couldn't afford to spend right now. She knew because Harrison came to her office door at 11:47 on the morning of the 4th day and said simply, "There's a call request from Marcus Webb." And she knew that Marcus Webb was Luca's primary outside counsel and that a call request from his attorney meant Luca had done the math. "Decline," she said. "And if he calls again?" "Decline again." She looked up from the documents on her desk. "And Harrison, if Luca Moretti contacts this office directly by any means, I want to know immediately, but I don't want him to know I was told." "Of course." She went back to her documents. She thought about what Luca was doing right now, in whatever room he was in, with this information newly arrived and spreading through everything he thought he knew. She thought about him replaying their marriage the way you replay a conversation when you realize the words meant something different than you heard them. The hotels and the shell companies and the investment structures and the political connections, everything she had helped him build, understanding now where it came from, understanding what it cost her to give it to him freely, because she loved him and believed he would become the man she thought he could be. She thought about him understanding, finally, that she had never needed the Moretti name. She had given him 5 years of her mind and her skills and her knowledge and her connections, and she had given it freely, and he had let his family reduce her to nothing in front of everyone because he had never truly seen her. "You cannot grieve a man," she thought, "who never looked at you clearly." She turned back to the documents on her desk. 3 weeks until the gala. There was an enormous amount of work to do. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, Manhattan moved in the cold winter light, vast and indifferent and full of opportunity. And Evelyn Prescott, for the first time in 5 years, was fully visible in it. She picked up her pen. She got to work. On the evening of the 6th day, Marcus Webb called a 4th time. And on the 7th, Luca Moretti stopped calling through attorneys. He sent a message himself, short, direct, in the unadorned style he used when he wanted something understood without decoration. 4 words, delivered through a channel she hadn't expected him to remember, a secure messaging application she had set up for them during the first year of their marriage and assumed had been forgotten. "We should talk. Please." She read it. She set the phone down on her desk. She picked it up again and read it one more time and set it down again, and she sat very still for a moment with the Manhattan skyline blazing cold and gold outside her window. Then she opened her laptop and went back to the guest list for the Winter Legacy Gala. She did not reply, but she added one more name to the list. The name arrived inside the Moretti estate like a stone dropped into still water. It did not arrive loudly. That was the thing about information that changes everything. It rarely announces itself with appropriate gravity. It comes in through a side door delivered by someone who doesn't fully understand what they're carrying, and then it sits in the room, and the room slowly reorganizes itself around it. Marcus Webb delivered it on a Tuesday morning in Luca's private office on the third floor of the Moretti compound in New York, not the Lake Tahoe property, which Luca had left within hours of the divorce papers being served, driven back through the night in silence, while his security detail exchanged careful looks in the front seats and said nothing. The New York office was where Luca did the real work. No art on the walls, no performance. Just a desk, a secure phone line, and a window that faced a brick wall because Luca Moretti had never cared about views. Marcus came in without knocking, which was already a signal. He was a careful man. He knocked. "We have a situation," he said. Luca was standing at the window facing the brick wall with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. He had not slept more than 3 hours in the past 4 days. It showed in the set of his shoulders and the quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of a man at rest, but of a man holding himself together through conscious effort. What kind? Marcus set a folder on the desk, the kind that changes the framing on everything. Luca turned from the window and looked at the folder, but did not move toward it. "Tell me." "Evelyn Prescott." Marcus stopped. He seemed to be choosing his next words with unusual care, which was not like him. Marcus Webb was a man who trafficked in blunt delivery as a professional discipline. Her full name, Evelyn Catherine Prescott. She is the only child of Charles Prescott. The coffee cup stayed in Luca's hand. "Charles Prescott," he said, and his voice was flat in the way that flat voices are flat when the person speaking is doing rapid internal arithmetic. "Prescott Capital, the fund. 43 billion under management, last public estimate, and that number is conservative by most private assessments. He controls infrastructure debt positions, and I know what he controls." Luca set the coffee cup on the windowsill. He walked to the desk and picked up the folder and opened it. The first page was a financial summary. The second was a family record. The third was a photograph. Charles Prescott and Evelyn at what appeared to be a private function, perhaps 8 years old, both of them in formal dress, his hand on her shoulder, her posture already carrying that thing Luca had spent 5 years watching without naming. He had spent 5 years watching that posture and feeling the shape of it without ever asking what it meant. He closed the folder. "How long has this been verifiable?" he said. "The connection? Always. She never legally changed her name. She went by Moretti socially, but her legal name remained Prescott throughout the marriage. Our people should have—" Marcus stopped himself. He cleared his throat. "It wasn't flagged. It wasn't flagged." Luca repeated this not as a question, but as a fact he was storing somewhere specific. He put the folder back on the desk. He walked back to the window. "Who else knows?" "Inside the organization? Right now, you and me. By tonight, it'll be impossible to contain. The financial press has already connected the photographs. By tomorrow morning, it's going to be everywhere." Luca said nothing for a long time. He looked at the brick wall outside the window. He thought about a night 3 years into the marriage, a dinner in Washington with 2 senators and a deputy secretary, and how Evelyn had managed that dinner with a precision he had attributed to intelligence and instinct, the way she seemed to know exactly where each person's leverage points were, the way the conversation moved in directions that benefited the Moretti organization's legislative interests without anyone at the table ever feeling managed. He had been proud of her that night. He had told her so in the car afterward, and she had looked at him briefly with an expression he now understood differently than he had then. He had thought she was pleased. He understood now that she was patient. "Get out," he said. "Luca, I need 10 minutes. Get out." Marcus got out. Luca stood alone in the office, and he did not move for a long time. The brick wall outside the window was unchanged. The cold coffee sat on the windowsill. The folder sat on the desk. The room held all of it without comment. He thought about the hotels. He thought about the shell companies, and the investment vehicles, and the political financing structures, all of it built from blueprints that Evelyn had drafted, all of it running on frameworks she had designed. He thought about the Delaware entity, and the logistics company, and the real estate fund, and he thought about what it meant that the woman who built all of it was the heir to one of the largest private financial institutions in the country, and she had done it for him without ever once mentioning whose daughter she was. He thought about his mother's face at the Lake Tahoe party, that controlled satisfaction when she held out the divorce papers, the performance of graciousness towards someone she had always dismissed as nothing. And he felt something move through him that was not quite shame and not quite rage, but lived in the territory between them. He picked up his phone. He looked at the message he had sent Evelyn 4 days ago. 4 words. "We should talk, please." He had sent it through a channel she might not even still have active, might have deleted the application entirely, might never have seen. He told himself this while knowing it wasn't true. Evelyn never deleted anything she might need. That was one of the first things he had understood about her. She had not replied. He put the phone in his pocket. He opened the office door. "Get me my mother," he said to the man standing in the corridor, "and call a house meeting for 7 tonight. Everyone, home." Vivian Moretti arrived at the New York compound at 3 in the afternoon in full composure, dressed, coiffed, carrying the specific serenity of a woman who believes she has handled a situation correctly and is waiting for that to be acknowledged. She came into Luca's office and sat in the chair across from his desk and arranged herself with the practiced grace of 63 years of performing certainty. Luca did not sit. He stood near the window with his hands in his pockets, and he looked at her. "Did you know?" he said. Vivian's expression adjusted slightly. "Know what, exactly?" "Who she was." "Evelyn." "Did you know her name?" "I knew she was from a financial family of some. Her full name, mother. Did you run her?" The word run sat in the air between them in its proper sense. The background investigation, the due diligence that the organization applied to every significant relationship before it was formalized. Luca had bypassed that process. He knew it, and Vivian knew it. He had been 31 and certain, and he had not wanted the investigation to find something that would make the decision complicated, and so he had made the decision first and told his mother the investigation was unnecessary because he already knew everything he needed to know. Vivian's chin came up slightly. "You told me not to." "I'm asking what you did." A pause. "We looked at her professionally. Basic surface review. Nothing deep." "And?" "And there was nothing that indicated—" She stopped. Something in his face was making her careful in a way she hadn't been when she walked in. The Prescott name didn't surface prominently. She wasn't presenting herself as anything, Luca said. That was the whole point. She wasn't performing a background for you to find. She was there because she chose to be there. And you stood in the Lake Tahoe estate 4 nights ago and handed her divorce papers in front of 43 people because you have spent 5 years treating her like she was less than nothing. Vivian straightened. "I protected this family's interests. You humiliated my wife. Your ex-wife, your soon-to-be. You humiliated her in front of our people and our allies and our political contacts," Luca said, and his voice was still flat, still controlled, because when Luca Moretti lost control, it was never loud. It was the opposite of loud. It went somewhere quiet and cold that people around him had learned to be frightened of. And now those same people are reading financial press articles about how she is the heir to a $43 billion fund and how she spent 5 years married to us while we called her nobody. Vivian said nothing. "How does that look?" he said. Still nothing. "I'm asking you a direct question." Vivian's composure held. It was a remarkable piece of architecture, her composure built over a lifetime and maintained even now. But something inside it shifted, a small and involuntary thing, the kind of shift that only happens when a person who has been certain encounters the specific weight of being wrong. "It looks like a mistake," she said quietly. "It looks like we didn't know what we had," Luca said. "It looks like we threw away something we didn't understand. And in this business, when people see you make that kind of error, they don't see arrogance. They see weakness. They see someone who can be fooled." He turned back to the window. "Get out." She got up. She walked to the door with her composure reconstructed, which was the only thing left to do. At the doorway, she stopped. "What are you going to do?" she said. "What I should have done a long time ago," he said. She waited. He didn't say anything else. She left. The house meeting at 7 was held in the ground floor conference room. 12 men around a long table, most of whom had been with the Moretti organization for a decade or more. Capos, logistics heads, 2 financial managers, the chief of security. Men who kept the machinery running and whose loyalty was real and had been tested, and who were now, for the first time in recent memory, looking at each other with the specific expression of people inside a structure that has made a sound they don't recognize. Luca came in at 7:12, late, which he never was, and sat at the head of the table and looked at the faces around it. "You've all seen the news," he said. Nobody spoke, which was confirmation. "Then you know who she was. What her name meant." He put his hands flat on the table. "I'm going to tell you something honestly. I didn't know. I did not know whose daughter she was when I married her. I found out 4 days ago, the same as you." He looked around the table. "Any questions about that? Ask them now." A man named Caruso, 58, head of Eastern Operations, the longest-serving person in the room, leaned forward slightly. "The structures she built, the legitimate side, the investment vehicles, the hotel group, the Delaware entity." He stopped. "Are those at risk?" "Not directly. The structures are legal and they're ours. The risk is the financing pipeline. Prescott Capital has connections to 6 of our major institutional banking relationships. If those relationships change—" "Do they change?" Caruso said. Luca looked at him. "I don't know yet." The room absorbed that. Luca Moretti saying, "I don't know," was not a common occurrence. It had a specific gravity. "What do we do?" someone said from the other end of the table. "We wait," Luca said. "We hold positions. We do not make any moves in the financial structures until I have a clearer picture. Nothing gets shifted, nothing gets liquidated, nothing gets renegotiated without coming through me first. We're going to look stable because we are stable. Whatever happens between me and Evelyn Prescott is personal. This organization doesn't react to personal business." Caruso nodded slowly. Others nodded. The meeting ended in 20 minutes. Luca stayed in the conference room after they filed out. He sat at the empty table in the quiet room, and he was still. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A news alert. Prescott Capital sources confirm Evelyn Prescott returning to active role in family firm. Winter Legacy Gala expected to serve as formal announcement. He read it twice. He set the phone face down on the table, on the Winter Legacy Gala. He knew the event. Everyone in the relevant social and financial geography of New York knew it. 11 years of tradition, a room full of the people who mattered in every way that money and power measured mattering. He had received invitations in previous years that had been declined because Evelyn always managed their social calendar, and she had always declined the Prescott events with quiet precision, and now he understood why. She had been protecting something. She had been protecting him from walking into a room where her father was, from a conversation that would have changed everything before she was ready for it to change. She had been protecting the marriage. He put his face in his hands for a moment, just a moment. Then he straightened and picked up his phone and called Marcus Webb. "The gala," he said when Marcus picked up. 3 weeks. "I see it. I need to be on that guest list." Silence on the line. "Luca, that's her event. Her family's event. Walking in there would be necessary. It would be seen as, I need you to find a way to get me on that list. A mutual contact, a charitable connection, whatever it takes. I'm not going to stand outside while she builds the narrative without me in the room." Another silence. "And if she refuses? If Charles Prescott personally has you removed from the list?" Luca thought about the message he had sent. "We should talk, please." He thought about the silence it had returned. "Then at least I'll know," he said. He hung up. He sat in the empty conference room for another 5 minutes, alone with the particular quiet of a man who is starting to understand the precise dimensions of what he has lost. Then his phone buzzed again. Not a news alert this time. A call. Unknown number, but the prefix was one he recognized. The routing used by Prescott Capital's internal communication system. He had seen it on Evelyn's phone enough times during the marriage to know it without knowing he knew it. He looked at the screen. He picked up. "Mr. Moretti." The voice was a woman's, calm, clipped, professional, with the quality of someone accustomed to delivering information without emotional annotation. "My name is Diana Reese. I work with Prescott Capital. I'm calling on behalf of Charles Prescott." Luca said nothing. He waited. Mr. Prescott would like you to know that effective immediately, Prescott Capital is reviewing its institutional relationships with organizations in which Moretti-affiliated entities hold financial interest. You should expect communications from the relevant banks and investment partners in the next 24 to 48 hours. Still, Luca said nothing. He also asked me to convey one additional message personally. A pause. Brief, precise, the length of a pause that is deliberate. He said, "She built that empire for you. You should have known what that meant." The line went dead. Luca sat with the phone in his hand and the deadline and the empty conference room around him and the particular silence of a man who has just heard something that cannot be unheard. He set the phone on the table. He stood up. He walked to the door of the conference room and opened it, and in the corridor outside, his security chief, a man named Dolan, who had worked for him for 9 years, was standing at his post with the alertness of someone who had been listening to the quality of the room and did not like what he was hearing. "Get me Caruso," Luca said. Dolan reached for his radio. "And Dolan." Luca stopped in the doorway. "How fast can we reach out to the institutional contacts directly? Not through counsel, directly. Before the Prescott people get to them first." Dolan looked at him. "Tonight? 4 hours, maybe. If everyone's reachable." "Start now," Luca said. "Every contact. Tonight." He walked back toward his office, and behind him Dolan was already on the radio, and the machinery of the organization was turning in a new direction with the specific urgency of something trying to outrun what was already in motion. And Luca Moretti, walking that corridor with the weight of Charles Prescott's message sitting in his chest like a stone, understood for the first time that he might already be he was already too late. That was the thing Luca understood at 2:17 in the morning when the third call came in. Not from a banking contact, not from a political ally, but from Caruso, whose voice on the phone carried the specific flatness of a man delivering information he does not want to be the one delivering. "Meridian pulled out," Caruso said. "An hour ago. Formal notification to Webb's office." Meridian Capital Partners was not the largest institutional relationship the Moretti organization maintained. It was the oldest, 11 years. The relationship predated the legitimate business structures, predated the hotels and the shell companies and the Delaware entity, predated everything Evelyn had built. It was the original thread that connected the Moretti money to the world of legitimate finance, the first door that had opened, and it had opened because of a single introduction made by a man who turned out to be a peripheral contact of Prescott Capital's fixed income division. Luca had not known that either. He was learning, in the space of a single night, how many things he had not known. "Who else?" he said. "Carver Group is reviewing. Hasn't pulled yet, but the language from their compliance office is... Webb says it's the language they use before they pull." Caruso paused. "And there's something else. Say it." "Altieri called me." A beat. "Not you. Me." Marco Altieri was the head of the Altieri family, the second largest organized crime operation on the Eastern Seaboard, and the Moretti organization's longest-standing peer alliance. The relationship was not warm. It was functional, the way relationships between powerful entities are functional when mutual benefit outweighs mutual distrust. But it was consistent. Altieri calling Caruso instead of Luca was a specific kind of message. "What did he say?" Luca said. "He said he's heard things that concern him. He said he'd like to have a conversation before the end of the week." Another pause. He said it in the tone of a man who's already made a decision and is giving you the courtesy of a conversation before he acts on it. Luca stood in his office with the phone against his ear and the brick wall outside the dark window and the cold coffee still on the windowsill where he had left it 14 hours ago. "Set it up," he said. "Tomorrow. Here. He'll want neutral ground. Then neutral ground. Just set it up." He hung up. He stood still. He pressed the heel of his hand against the edge of the desk and he breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. And he looked at the folder Marcus had brought him that morning, still sitting on the corner of the desk where he'd left it, Evelyn's photograph visible at the edge of the open flap. He closed the folder. He sat down in the chair behind the desk for the first time all day, and he put his elbows on the desk and his face in his hands, and he stayed there in the dark for a long moment, long enough to feel the full weight of the night pressing down on the back of his neck, And then he straightened up, and he turned on the desk lamp, and he pulled a legal pad toward him. And he started writing down every financial relationship the organization maintained in order of exposure, because there was nothing else to do at 2 in the morning when everything was moving too fast and he needed to see it laid out in his own handwriting to understand its actual shape. He wrote for 2 hours. He did not like what the shape looked like. Puzzled. Vivian Moretti arrived at the compound at 8 the next morning without being summoned, which told Luca she had been awake most of the night too, working her own phones, taking her own temperature of the situation. She came into the kitchen where he was standing at the counter with black coffee and the legal pad. He had moved from the office to the kitchen at some point in the early hours, the way a person migrates through a house when they can't sleep, following the light. And she looked at the legal pad, and she looked at his face, and she did something she almost never did. She sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. "How bad?" she said. "Bad enough." He set the coffee down. "Meridian is out, Carver is going, Altieri wants a meeting." She absorbed that. The Altieri part made her go still in a particular way. "Marco." "Yes." "What does he want?" "To tell me he's reconsidering the alliance in a setting where he can watch my face when he does it." Luca picked up the legal pad and set it down again. "He wants to see if I'm still the man he made the alliance with. And right now, I don't know what he's going to see." Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "Is there a way to reach her?" Luca looked at her. "Evelyn," she said, "is there a way to reach her directly? Not through attorneys, not through the father." She kept her voice even, but the effort it cost her was visible in the set of her jaw. If the financial pressure is coming from the Prescott side, and if she has influence over that, which she appears to, then perhaps a direct conversation. "She won't take a call from you," Luca said. "Not now. Not after the Lake Tahoe party. Not from me. From you." He looked at her for a long time. "I already reached out." Vivian waited. She didn't reply. The kitchen was quiet. The morning light came through the window over the sink, thin and winter gray, and it made the room look exhausted in a way that matched everything inside it. "Then we find another way," Vivian said, and her voice had dropped to something that was not quite an apology, but lived in the neighborhood of one. The closest Vivian Moretti was architecturally capable of getting. "There is no other way," Luca said. "That's the point. We built everything on a foundation we didn't understand, and now the foundation is walking away from us, and there's nothing to negotiate with because everything we would use to negotiate was given to us by her in the first place." He picked up his coffee. "So we deal with what's left. And what's left is the Altieri meeting, and the banking contacts, and the structure, and we hold it together without her." Vivian nodded slowly. She left without drinking anything. Luca stood alone in the kitchen and looked at the legal pad and drank his cold coffee, and felt the particular loneliness of a man who has finally understood something and has nowhere useful to put the understanding. But Marco Altieri was 64 years old, and had the physical stillness of a man who had long ago made peace with every kind of danger. He arrived at the neutral location, a private dining room in a restaurant in Midtown that both organizations had used for sensitive meetings over the years, at exactly noon, with 2 men who stayed outside the door. And he sat across from Luca and he ordered water, and he looked at Luca the way you look at something you are evaluating for structural integrity. "You look like you haven't slept," Altieri said. "I haven't." "That's honest." Altieri unfolded his napkin and set it on his lap with deliberate care, the gesture of a man who would maintain his manners in a burning building. "I'm going to be equally honest with you, Luca, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve theater right now." "Go ahead." "There are people in my organization, serious people, people whose judgment I respect, who are suggesting that the Moretti operation has been operating under a misapprehension for several years, that you built your legitimate infrastructure on a foundation that belonged to someone else, and that the person it belonged to has now taken it back." He paused. "Is that a fair assessment?" Luca looked at him steadily. "The structures are legally ours. The entities, the registrations, the operating frameworks. All of it. Legally." Altieri nodded as if this were a point of minor academic interest. "But the relationships, the banking relationships, the political access, the international partners, those were built on the Prescott name, even if nobody said so out loud." He picked up his water glass. Weren't they? Luca did not answer immediately, and his silence was the answer. I'm not here to attack you, Altieri said. I want you to understand that. I'm here because an alliance is only as strong as the weakest assumption underneath it, and I need to know what your assumptions are right now, what you think you have, and what you think you can hold. He set the glass down. Because what I'm hearing from my people is that your financial foundation is shaking, and a shaking foundation shakes everything built on top of it. We're managing the banking situation, Luca said. Are you? We will be. Altieri studied him. And the woman? The word sat between them with its full weight. That's personal, Luca said. Nothing is personal at this level, Altieri said, not unkindly. You know that better than anyone. The question of your relationship with Evelyn Prescott is not personal to me. I don't care about the marriage. I don't care about the divorce. What I care about is whether the organization I have an alliance with is going to be the same organization in 6 months that it was 6 months ago. He leaned forward slightly, and I need you to be honest with me about that. Because if the answer is no, if the organization is going to contract significantly, if the reach is going to narrow, then I need to adjust our arrangement accordingly. Not end it. Adjust it. Luca understood what adjust meant. It meant Altieri was already repositioning. It meant the alliance would survive in a diminished form. The Altieri organization would maintain contact, would preserve the relationship for future utility, but would begin treating the Moretti operation as a secondary partner rather than a peer. It was a demotion with a handshake attached. Give me 2 weeks, Luca said. For what? To show you the organization is stable, to demonstrate that the financial adjustments are managed and the structure holds. Altieri was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table between them. 2 weeks, he said finally. After that, I need to make decisions. He picked up the menu and looked at it, which was the signal that the serious part of the conversation was concluded, and Luca picked up his own menu and looked at it without reading a single word on the page. 2 weeks. He needed to fix in 2 weeks what had been breaking for years. He was in the car heading back to the compound when his phone buzzed with a message from Dolan. Not a call. A message, which meant Dolan had judged it too sensitive for a phone line, even a secure one. Need you to see something. The office. Now. He told the driver to go faster. Dolan was waiting in the ground floor security room with 2 monitors running, and the kind of expression that belongs to a man who has found something he wishes he hadn't. He closed the door when Luca came in and stood in front of the monitors and looked at the floor for a moment before looking up. We ran a standard sweep this morning, Dolan said. Communication channels, financial documents, access logs. Standard protocol, same as every month. He stopped. We found something in the file server, in the legacy archive, the documents from the early years, before the legitimate structures were built. What kind of something? Dolan turned to the monitor and pulled up a document. These are communication logs from about 18 months into the marriage, between Evelyn Moretti and an external email address that traces back to a Prescott Capital subsidiary. He stepped back so Luca could see the screen clearly. She was in contact with her father's organization throughout the marriage. Not continuously, there are long gaps, but the contact was there. Luca stood in front of the monitor and read. The emails were brief and professional in tone, no emotional content, no family language, nothing that read as personal correspondence. They were operational in nature, requests for verification of certain financial structures, queries about regulatory exposure in specific jurisdictions. At one point, an apparently routine inquiry about the legitimacy of a Delaware filing that turned out to have been submitted incorrectly and had been quietly corrected before it became a problem. Prescott Capital's people had been monitoring the structures Evelyn built, quietly, consistently. They had been watching the whole time. Luca read 3 pages of logs without speaking. Then he stepped back from the monitor and he breathed, careful, controlled, the kind of breathing a man does when what he wants to do is put his fist through something and he's deciding not to. She was running information back to her father, he said. The logs suggest she was feeding information back. His voice was still flat, still controlled. The structures we built. She was keeping Prescott Capital informed. He turned away from the monitor. For how long? Dolan pulled up a summary. The earliest log we found is from about 14 months into the marriage, The most recent is, he hesitated. 4 months ago. 4 months ago. Luca stood with that. 4 months ago, the marriage was visibly deteriorating but legally still intact. 4 months ago, he had been negotiating a significant new partnership with a European logistics firm, a deal that Evelyn had been closely involved in structuring. He thought about the terms of that deal, and he thought about the information those terms contained, and he thought about what Prescott Capital might have done with that information, and he felt a cold that was not the room's temperature settle into the space between his shoulder blades. Have Marcus look at the logistics partnership, he said. The European deal. Every term, every clause. I want to know if there's anything in there that looks like it was structured to benefit a competitor. Dolan nodded, made a note. And pull every document she touched in the last 2 years. Everything. I want a complete list of what she had access to. He stopped. What she had full access to. Luca, that's most of the financial architecture. She had administrative access to almost everything in the legitimate side. I know, he said. That's why I want the list. He left the security room and walked up the stairs toward his office, and he moved with the mechanical precision of a man who is keeping his body functional through sheer will while his mind does something else entirely. He went into the office, and he closed the door, and he stood in the middle of the room, and he let himself feel it for 30 seconds. The full, unmanaged weight of it, the specific horror of a betrayal that isn't simple, that doesn't reduce cleanly to a villain and a victim. Because the person who did it also loved you. He was almost certain she loved him, and those two things were both true, and they did not cancel each other out. And that was the worst part. She had loved him, and she had watched his back, and she had run information to the one organization that could now dismantle everything he had built. Or, he stopped. He made himself stop and think rather than feel. Or she had loved him, and she had watched his back, and she had communicated with her father's people to make sure the structures were clean and legally sound because she knew things about regulatory exposure that the Moretti organization's own people would have missed, and she had done it because she was protecting the empire she was building for the man she loved, using the knowledge base available to her. Both readings of the same evidence. Which one was true? He pressed his hands flat on the desk, and he looked down at the wood grain, and he breathed. He didn't know. He did not know, and he could not know without asking her, and she was not speaking to him. And in the absence of that knowledge, every decision he made from this moment forward was built on the same shaking foundation he had just described to Altieri. An assumption about what was true that he could not fully verify. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Marcus Webb. He picked up. The European deal, Marcus said immediately, without preamble. The logistics partnership. Luca's hand tightened on the phone. Tell me. There's a clause in the revenue distribution schedule, Section 14, subsection C. I missed it the first time because it's written into the arbitration language and it looks like standard boilerplate. Marcus's voice was careful, the too careful voice again. It's not standard boilerplate. It limits our upside exposure in a way that... He stopped. It advantages the European partner significantly in a revenue scenario above a certain threshold, which we were expecting to hit next year. Luca did not say anything. Luca, if we hit the revenue threshold under the current terms, we effectively transfer how much? A pause. Best estimate? Somewhere between 8 and 12 million over a 3-year period, flowing to the European partner rather than to us. 8 to 12 million. Not catastrophic on its own, but structured into a document he had signed, a document Evelyn had helped draft, a document that had gone through 3 rounds of review without anyone catching a clause buried in arbitration language. Who does the European partner have a relationship with? Luca said. He could hear Marcus breathing on the other end of the line, and the quality of that breathing told him Marcus had already looked. The European partner has a documented relationship with a fund registered in Luxembourg, Marcus said. The Luxembourg fund is managed by a board that includes 2 individuals who previously worked for... A pause. Prescott Capital. The room went completely silent around Luca. Not the silence of an empty room. The silence of a room where the last possible innocent explanation has just left and taken all the air with it. He set the phone on the desk without ending the call, and he stood very still and he looked at the photograph of Evelyn he had taken out of the folder last night and set on the corner of the desk and not moved since. Some part of him needing to look at her face while he tried to understand what was true. And he looked at her face now, confident, composed, carrying that thing he had spent 5 years watching without naming. And he felt the cold settle deeper until it was not just between his shoulder blades anymore, but in the center of his chest, in the specific location where trust lives before it. The trust lives before it dies, and when it dies all at once. Luca picked the phone back up. "Marcus," he said, "clear your evening." "Already done," Marcus said, which meant Marcus had known this call was going to go the way it went and had prepared accordingly. Luca noted that without comment and filed it in the part of his mind that kept track of who anticipated what and when, because in his world, the people who anticipated things either cared about you or were watching you, and the distinction mattered. Get Webb, Caruso, Dolan, the office, 2 hours. He hung up. He stood over the photograph of Evelyn for one more second. Then he turned it face down on the desk, and he went to the window and looked at the brick wall, and he let the anger come. Not the cold version, not the managed version, but the real thing underneath it, the hot animal thing that he kept caged, because a man in his position who loses that cage loses everything. He let it come, and he felt it move through him like current through a wire, and then he breathed it out, and he put the cage back, and he was cold again. Cold was useful. Hot got you killed. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes, and by the end of it, the table was covered in documents and empty coffee cups, and Caruso had taken his jacket off, and Marcus had loosened his tie, and Dolan had filled 4 pages of a legal pad with names and numbers, and nobody in the room looked like they had slept recently. The European logistics deal was the centerpiece. Marcus laid it out in full. The clause structure, the revenue mechanics, the Luxembourg Fund, the Prescott Capital connection. He laid it out with the methodical precision of a man who was furious, and was using precision as the container for his fury because there was no other available container in a professional setting. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Caruso said, "She built a leak into it." "We don't know that," Luca said. "Luca, we don't know that," he said again, and his voice had an edge that made Caruso sit back slightly. The clause could be a protective measure. It could be compliance-driven. It could be something her people flagged as a regulatory necessity in the European jurisdiction and structured accordingly. He looked around the table. "We do not conclude sabotage until we can eliminate every other explanation. That's how we've always operated, and that's how we operate now." Caruso looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his documents. "There's more," Dolan said. Luca looked at him. Dolan turned his legal pad around and pushed it across the table. "We kept pulling the access logs, like you asked. Documents she touched in the last 2 years. He tapped the pad. "There are 6 additional structures with similar clause anomalies. Different documents, different deals. Same pattern. Language buried in technical subsections that redirects value under specific performance conditions. 6. Not one clause in one document. 6 structures. A pattern." Luca looked at the legal pad. He looked at Caruso's face, which was doing the thing faces do when a man who has been loyal for a long time is watching his boss process information that the boss does not want to be true. He looked at Marcus, who was looking at the table. He picked up the legal pad. He read Dolan's notes slowly, line by line, the way his father had taught him to read anything that might be used against him, looking for the specific place where the thing becomes undeniable. He found it on page 3. A note beside a real estate transaction. The redirected value in that structure, under the performance conditions specified, would have flowed to a holding entity that Dolan had traced through 2 shell layers to a registration that listed a single officer. The officer's name was a name Luca didn't recognize, but the registered address was the Park Avenue building where Charles Prescott kept his private residence. He set the pad down. "How long?" he said. His voice was very quiet now, the quietest it had been all evening. "How long has this been in place?" "The earliest one we found," Dolan said carefully, "is from about 2 years ago." 2 years. For 2 years, while he was building and expanding and consolidating and believing that his empire was growing on a foundation he understood, there had been a slow, patient architectural bleeding installed in the structures by the woman who designed them. He pushed back from the table and stood up and walked to the window. The same brick wall, always the same brick wall. He should have put a window in this office that faced something worth looking at. It was too late now, and he put his hand against the glass and he breathed. Behind him, nobody spoke. "Get me the full exposure number," he said. "Total value across all 6 structures. Worst case scenario, if every performance condition triggers. He heard Marcus's pen moving. And get me a way to reach her, he said. Not through attorneys, not through Prescott Capital, her directly, tonight. Caruso said carefully, She's going to hear from me tonight, Luca said, because in 3 days she's standing in a room full of every person who matters in this city, and she's going to formally announce herself as the head of the most powerful private financial institution in the country. And whatever she's built against us will be sealed the moment that happens. Because after that announcement, she won't need to be careful anymore. He turned from the window. So it happens tonight, or it doesn't happen at all. The room held that. I'll find a way, Marcus said. Masham. The way Marcus found was through a woman named Sonia Reyes, who had been Evelyn's personal assistant during the first 2 years of the marriage and who had maintained a quiet and entirely personal friendship with Evelyn afterward. A friendship Luca had known about and never questioned because it seemed harmless. Because Sonia was no one. Because he had always been careless about the people he classified as no one. Sonia called Evelyn at 9:45 in the evening and spoke to her for 4 minutes. And at 10:03, Evelyn called a number Marcus had set up as a clean line. And Luca was sitting in his office alone when the line rang, and he picked it up before the second ring was finished. Silence on the line for a moment. Then her voice. You have 10 minutes, she said. Say what you need to say. He had prepared for this. He had spent 40 minutes preparing, thinking through the approach, the sequence, what to lead with and what to hold back and how to read her responses in real time and adjust. He was good at this. He had built an empire on conversations like this one. He knew exactly what he was going to say. He said none of it. Did you build it against me? He said. The clause structure, the redirected value, the Luxembourg connection. He stopped. Tell me the truth. A silence, longer than he expected. Which truth do you want? She said. The one where I answer the question you're actually asking, or the one where I tell you what you've found and explain what it means? Both. Another silence. He heard her breathe once, a measured breath, the kind she took when she was deciding something. The structures are protective, she said, not offensive. The value redirection you found isn't extraction, it's a circuit breaker. It was designed to limit your exposure in jurisdictions where the regulatory risk was higher than your people understood. If those performance conditions had triggered under the wrong circumstances, you would have faced a far larger loss than the redirected amount. She paused. The Luxembourg connection is coincidental. 2 people I knew at Prescott happened to be on that board. I didn't know when I structured the deal. I found out afterward, and I should have flagged it, and I didn't, because the deal was already signed, and reopening it would have required explanations I wasn't ready to give. He listened. He listened to every word and the spaces between words and the quality of her breathing and the particular rhythm of her delivery, which he had learned over 5 years the way you learn a landscape you travel through daily. She wasn't lying. He didn't know if that made it better or worse. And the Prescott communication logs, he said, 14 months in, running through 4 months ago. A different silence this time, heavier. Yes, she said, explain that. I was protecting the structures, she said. Your legal exposure in the Delaware filing alone could have cost you the entire legitimate operation. My father's compliance team caught it in 3 days. Your people hadn't seen it in 3 months. Her voice didn't heat up, didn't defend itself. It stayed level in the way that level voices stay level when they're telling the truth, and they know the truth isn't going to land well. I used the resources available to me to protect what we built. I never transferred proprietary information. I never compromised the syndicate. I asked compliance questions through channels I trusted to be discreet. They were my operations, he said. My decisions. You went around me. I went around you, she said. Because if I had told you, you would have had to decide what to do about the fact that your wife was using her father's organization to clean up errors your own people were missing. And you would have made it about the decision rather than the problem. And the problem needed to be fixed. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. It had a shape to it. Luca pressed his hand flat on the desk and stared at the turned-over photograph and felt something move through him that was not anger and was not grief and was not the cold, useful thing he had been operating on for the past 18 hours. It was something more specific, more personal. The sensation of realizing that the person you are furious at is not wrong. Evelyn, he said, And then he stopped because the next word he wanted to say was her name again, just her name, and that was not sufficient, and he knew it. "Your 10 minutes are almost up," she said quietly. "I need to see you." "No. Before the gala. I need Luca." Her voice changed, just slightly. Something in it that was not cold, but was finished. "What you found in those documents isn't a weapon I built against you. But what happens at the gala in 3 days is not something I'm going to negotiate with you. That's not about the marriage, and it's not about the money. That's about me. About who I am." She paused. "You never asked me that in 5 years. You never once asked me who I was before you." He had nothing for that. Nothing real, nothing sufficient. "I'm asking now," he said. "It's too late to ask now," she said. And she wasn't cruel when she said it. That was the thing that went deepest. She wasn't cruel. She sounded tired and clear and completely certain, and that combination was worse than cruelty because it left no opening. The line went dead. He sat with the dead phone in his hand. Then his door opened without a knock, and Caruso came in fast, and the look on Caruso's face was the look that Luca had learned over years to read, as something has broken and I don't know how to stop it. "Altieri," Caruso said. Luca set the phone on the desk. "What?" "He's not waiting for the 2 weeks." Caruso came to the desk and put his phone in front of Luca. A message on the screen, 3 lines from Altieri's secure channel. "He's calling a summit. 3 days. All the families with Eastern Seaboard operations. He's framing it as a general coordination meeting, but it's not," Luca said. "It's not. It's a vote, Luca. It's a vote on the alliance structure, on whether the Moretti position in the coalition gets reclassified." Caruso's voice stayed steady, but his hands weren't. He took his phone back and held it too tightly. 3 days is the day of the gala." Luca looked up. "He picked the date deliberately," Caruso said. "While you're dealing with the Prescott announcement, the summit happens without you. Whatever gets decided in a room you're not in." The room Luca was in felt suddenly very small. Not because it had changed, because the amount of space he was operating in had contracted, from every side simultaneously, with the kind of precision that looked like coincidence and wasn't. "Altieri talked to someone," Luca said. "Someone who told him about the gala date." Caruso didn't answer, which was an answer. Luca stood up. He walked around the desk and to the door and into the corridor, and Dolan was there and 2 other men, and they all had the same look. The look of people inside a structure listening to it strain. "Get everyone back in the conference room," Luca said. "Now. All of them." He walked the corridor toward the conference room, and he felt the compound around him differently than he had ever felt it. The weight of the walls, the presence of the men, the particular texture of a place that has been a fortress for years beginning to feel like something else. Something that required a different word. He pushed that feeling down, and he walked. The conference room filled in 4 minutes. 12 men, same as before, plus 2 additional financial people Marcus had called in during the evening. 14 faces looking at him across the long table. Luca stood at the head, and he looked at them for a moment without speaking. "Altieri has called a summit for the same day as the Prescott Gala," he said. "That's not an accident. Someone in this organization told him about the date." He let that sit for 2 seconds. "I'm not going to spend time tonight finding out who. We don't have time for that. What we have time for is this. We are going to the gala." Caruso said, "The summit happens without us," Luca said. "Because if I go to the summit and I'm not at that gala, I'm letting Altieri choose the ground, and I'm letting Evelyn Prescott stand in a room full of every person who matters and build the version of this story that doesn't include my response." He put his hands on the table. "I am not going to be absent from that room." "And if Altieri votes while you're gone," Marcus said, "then he votes, and we deal with it after." Luca looked around the table. "I need to know who's with me. Not the organization, not the structure. Me, personally. In that room, 3 days from now." The table was quiet for a moment. Caruso said, "I'm with you." And then the others, one by one, in the particular way that rooms of men commit to a leader. Not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the steady plainness of people who have made a decision and are done reconsidering it. Dolan last. He looked at Luca and he nodded once. Luca straightened. He felt the thing in his chest that was not hope and was not confidence, but was the specific resolve of a man who has run out of options and has chosen to move forward anyway, because forward is the only direction that still has any possibility in it. 3 days, he said. Get me on that guest list. The Winter Legacy Gala invitation arrived at the Moretti compound the following morning. Not through a mutual contact, not through a charitable connection, not through any of the channels Marcus had been working. It arrived in a plain cream-colored envelope with Luca's name on the front in handwriting he recognized immediately because he had watched that handwriting for 5 years. The particular slant of it, the pressure she used on consonants, the way she crossed her T's with a single clean stroke that never wavered. No note inside, just the invitation. He held it, and he felt the weight of it, and he understood it for what it was. Not forgiveness, not an opening, not a signal that anything between them had softened. It was something colder and more deliberate than that. It was a summons. It was the same message the gala itself was intended to send to everyone who received it, and she had chosen to send it to him directly, in her own hand, so that he would know she had made the choice consciously. She wanted him in the room. She wanted him to see it. He set the invitation on the desk beside the turned-over photograph, and he looked at both of them for a moment. Then he picked up the photograph and looked at her face, and he said nothing, and he thought nothing in particular. Or rather, he thought too many things at once for any single one of them to be legible, which amounted to the same thing. He set the photograph back down, face up this time. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "We have an invitation," he said. "Tell everyone. Dress accordingly." He paused. "And Marcus, the Altieri Summit. Send a message to Marco. Tell him I'm aware of the date and I'm choosing the gala. Tell him I'll see him after. And tell him—" He stopped. He looked at the invitation. "Tell him that a man who lets someone else choose his ground for him deserves to lose it. He'll understand what I mean." He hung up. 3 days. He didn't know what he was walking into. He didn't know what she had planned, what Charles Prescott would say, how the room would read when he walked through that door with the Moretti name on his back and the weight of a fracturing empire behind him. What he knew was that the woman who had spent 5 years invisible was about to step fully into the light, and he had helped to make her invisible, and the least he could do, the very least, the minimum human thing, was be there to witness what that light looked like when it finally landed on her. He owed her that. He owed her considerably more than that. But he would start with being in the room. The 3 days passed the way the hours before a collision pass. Not slowly, not quickly, but with the specific texture of time that knows what's coming and can't decide whether to rush toward it or pull back. The financial adjustments continued. 2 more banking relationships formalized their withdrawal, one held. Altieri's summit convened without Luca, and the reports that came back through back channels were deliberately vague, which meant decisions had been made that nobody wanted to put in writing yet. The organization held its positions. The men held their posts. The compound in New York was quiet in the way that compounds get quiet before something changes inside them permanently. On the morning of the gala, Luca stood in front of the mirror in his dressing room for a long time. He was wearing the black suit, not the navy, the black one, the one he had worn to his father's funeral and to 3 meetings that had changed the direction of his life. He wore it when the situation required him to be the most exact version of himself, when there was no room for anything less. He looked at his reflection and he looked like what he was, a man who had built something real and broken something realer, and who was walking into a room to face the consequence. His phone buzzed. "Dolan, car's ready?" He straightened his jacket. He walked out of the dressing room and down the stairs and through the front door of the compound into the cold Manhattan night, and the cars were waiting with their engines running, and the city spread out around him in all its indifferent brilliance. And somewhere across it, in a ballroom full of the most powerful people in America, Evelyn Prescott was already there, already in the room, She was already the center of the room before the doors opened for him. That was the thing Luca understood the moment he stepped through the entrance of the ballroom and felt the atmosphere shift, not because of him, but because of the direction every face in the room was already pointed. The Winter Legacy Gala occupied the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, 40 floors above Midtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows running the length of the eastern wall, and crystal chandeliers the size of small cars burning overhead, and 230 people dressed in the particular way that people dress when they want to communicate that they belong to a specific stratum of the world. Senators, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, 3 federal judges. The kind of room where a single conversation could move money across continents or quietly end a career that had taken 30 years to build. Luca had been in rooms like this his entire adult life. He had never walked into one feeling like the smallest person in it. He stood just inside the entrance with Caruso on his left and Dolan 3 steps behind, and he looked across the ballroom to where Evelyn stood beside her father near the center of the room, and the sight of her stopped something in his chest with a physical abruptness that surprised him, because he had been preparing for this moment for 3 days and had believed the preparation would be sufficient. It was not sufficient. She was wearing deep ivory, a gown that was architectural in its simplicity, the kind of garment that required a certain kind of woman to wear it rather than be worn by it. Her hair was up, and the line of her neck and shoulders carried that thing he had spent 5 years watching without naming. And he could name it now, standing 40 feet away with 200 people between them. It was the specific posture of a person who has stopped performing and started simply being, and it was more powerful than anything she had ever worn or said or done in his presence, because it was completely unconstructed. This was who she actually was. He had been married to a version of her that held itself smaller. Charles Prescott stood beside her with the physical authority of a man who had been the most important person in most rooms for 4 decades and had long since stopped needing to demonstrate it. He was speaking with a senator whose name Luca knew and whose number he had in his phone, a number that had gone unreturned for 6 days. And as Luca watched, the senator leaned toward Charles with the specific deference of a man who has recently recalibrated who in this room requires his attention. Caruso said quietly, close to his ear, "We don't have to stay long." "We're staying," Luca said. He moved into the room. The first thing he noticed was the quality of the attention he received. Not hostile, not warm, something more precise than either. The careful, measuring attention of people who are watching a situation and reserving judgment, who have read the financial press and the social coverage, and who are now gathering primary data with their own eyes. He had walked into rooms with enemies before. He had walked into rooms where men wanted him dead. This was different. This was a room full of people deciding what he was worth going forward. And that was a particular kind of exposure that had nothing to do with physical danger and everything to do with the thing that had driven him his entire life, the need to be taken seriously by serious people. He took a glass of champagne from a passing server. He did not drink it. He held it because holding it gave his hands something to do. And he moved through the room slowly, exchanging the necessary greetings, keeping his face composed and his voice steady, feeling the whole time the awareness of Evelyn's location in the room with the particular precision of someone tracking a fixed point by instinct. He had not yet looked directly at her since he came in. She had not looked at him either. He knew because he would have felt it. Diana Reese materialized at his elbow 40 minutes after he arrived, which he had expected. She appeared without preamble, a glass of water in her hand, her expression entirely neutral. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "Miss Reese. She knows you're here." "I assumed. She'd like you to understand something before the formal announcement." Diana paused, and the pause was precise, the length of a pause that is delivering a message rather than filling space. "The structures you found, the clause anomalies." Luca looked at her directly. "She spent the night before she left Lake Tahoe transferring the correction protocols to your financial team's server," Diana said. "Every structure with an anomaly. The documentation is in a folder in your organization system under a file name your IT people would have found within the week. It contains everything needed to amend the clauses and sever the Luxembourg connection entirely." She kept her voice flat and professional. "She wasn't going to let it hurt you. She never intended it to hurt you." He stood with that for a moment. "Then what was it for?" he said. "Insurance," Diana said simply. "Not to use, just to have." She looked across the room briefly. "She spent 5 years building your empire without any protection of her own. She wanted one lever she could pull if she needed to. She never needed to." A pause. "She never pulled it." Diana moved away into the crowd before he could respond. Luca stood alone in the middle of the room, with 200 people around him and the champagne glass in his hand, and the particular quality of silence that exists inside a man when the last version of a story he was telling himself collapses and there is nothing yet to replace it. She had built the protection and never used it. In 5 years, even at the end, even after everything, she had not used it. He set the champagne glass on a nearby table. He started moving toward her. He was 12 feet away when Charles Prescott stepped to the microphone at the front of the room, and the music faded and the crowd oriented itself toward the small raised platform near the windows. And Luca stopped where he was because there was nothing to do but stop. Charles Prescott at a microphone was not a man performing. He was a man reporting, the way engineers report on structures, with precision, without decoration, with the confidence of someone who has checked his numbers and is not concerned about what they show. 51 years ago, Charles said, I started Prescott Capital with $40,000, a second-hand desk, and the absolute certainty that I had no idea what I was doing. A sound moved through the crowd. Not quite laughter, something warmer. That certainty turned out to be the most useful thing I ever had. Because the people who don't know what they're doing watch everything. They notice what other people miss. They ask questions that the confident people consider beneath them. He paused and looked at the room. I have been watching someone do that for her entire life, he said, and I have been waiting, with the particular patience of a man who understands that some things cannot be rushed, for the moment to tell this room what I know. He turned slightly, and his eyes found Evelyn, and the look that passed between them was private in the way that the most significant looks always are. Two people speaking a language that doesn't require the room. My daughter has agreed to assume full leadership of Prescott Capital. Effective the first of the year, she will serve as chairman and chief executive. She will be the first Prescott to hold both roles simultaneously, and she will do it, he said, better than I did. The room responded. Genuine, full, the sound of 200 people who had been waiting to know something and had just been told. Evelyn did not smile. Not the performance version. She pressed her lips together briefly, and she lifted her chin, and she looked at the room with the particular directness of a person who has stopped protecting herself from being seen, and Luca, standing 12 feet away, watched it happen in real time. He watched her become the thing she had always been. He watched it, and he felt the full weight of what he had wasted land on him all at once. Not the money, not the political connections, not the empire or the alliances or the financial architecture. What he had wasted was 5 years of this woman choosing him. 5 years of someone with every resource in the world, spending those resources on him freely, not because she had to, not because she needed anything from him, but because she loved him and believed he was worth it. He had not believed he was worth it. That was the thing underneath all of it that he had never said out loud. He had been afraid. In the specific way that powerful men are afraid, not of enemies or rivals, but of the people who see them clearly and choose them anyway. Because being chosen by someone with clear eyes means being known, and being known means there is something to lose. He had destroyed the marriage to avoid losing it. He understood that now, standing in the ballroom with the applause moving around him like water, too late to be useful. The crowd shifted after the announcement, breaking into smaller conversations, and Evelyn moved through it with the particular ease of someone who has found their footing on new ground, accepting congratulations and introductions with a composure that was not performed. Luca watched her work the room for several minutes. Then she stopped moving and turned and looked directly at him for the first time since he had arrived. The distance between them was 8 feet. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she said something to the person beside her, and she walked toward him, and he made himself stand still and breathe and not interpret the approach as anything more than it was. She stopped 2 feet away. The same distance Vivian had used at the Lake Tahoe party, he noticed. He wondered if she had calculated that or if it was instinct. She looked at him with the expression he had no name for, the one he had tried to read for 5 years and always slightly missed. You came, she said. You invited me. I didn't think you would. A pause. I thought you'd go to the Altieri summit. Altieri can wait, he said. He's been waiting his whole career to outlast someone. It's what he does. He looked at her face. He looked at it carefully, the way you look at something you are trying to memorize, and she let him, which surprised him. I owe you an apology. Not for the marriage ending, for how it ended, for what I let happen at Lake Tahoe. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Around them the room moved and talked, and the chandeliers burned, and the Manhattan night pressed itself against the tall windows, and none of it mattered particularly. Your mother made a choice, she said. You made a choice not to stop her. Those are two different things. Yes, he said, they are. And you understand that. I understand it now. I wasn't looking at you clearly. I was looking at what you represented to the organization. To my family. I was looking at the role. He stopped. He looked at the floor briefly and then back at her face. I wasn't looking at you. Something in her expression shifted. Not softened, exactly, but changed. Became more present. She had the look of someone who has been waiting to hear a specific true thing said and has heard it said correctly and is now deciding what to do with it. The documents, he said. Diana told me. The correction protocols. I wasn't going to use them against you, she said. I want you to know that. I know. Do you? Yes, he said. I do. Because in 5 years, even when it was bad, you never played to damage, you played to build. He looked at her steadily. Even the things I thought were against me. They weren't. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, the Luxembourg connection was genuinely accidental. I need you to know that. I know that too. How? Because you don't make accidents like that and then leave them in place for 2 years if the intention was to use them. You would have found a cleaner instrument. He paused. You're better at this than I gave you credit for. And that's the most honest thing I can say. Something moved across her face. A small thing, quickly controlled, but he caught it because he was watching carefully. It was the specific expression of a person who has been underestimated for a long time, hearing themselves accurately assessed, and it produced a reaction that was not quite pain and not quite relief, but contained elements of both. What do you want, Luca? She said quietly. He had prepared for this question too. He had prepared several answers, arranged in order of what he thought she might accept. He discarded all of them. I wanted to see you in this room, he said. I wanted to see what you look like when you're not making yourself smaller for someone else. He stopped. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Not because it changes anything, not because I expect anything from it, just because it's true and you deserve to hear it said out loud in a room that's watching. The room was not watching. The room was occupied with itself, with the 100 small conversations and transactions and negotiations that populated a room like this. But he said it as if the room were watching because that was what the moment required. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she said, I loved you because you were the first person who ever made me feel like my mind was the most important thing about me. Before the name, before the money, before any of it. You asked me questions that nobody had ever bothered to ask. In the beginning, she paused. You stopped asking. I know, he said. You got what you needed and you stopped being curious about me. Her voice stayed even. It cost her something to keep it even, and he could see that it cost her and he did not look away from it. And I stayed because I thought I could build something real enough that you'd start looking again. I kept building. She looked around the room briefly. The announcement, the applause, the new architecture of her life taking its public shape. I built all of this, and you were still looking at the wall. He had nothing for that. Nothing adequate. You're right, he said. She looked back at him. You're right, he said again, because it needed to be said twice to be real. And I don't have a version of this where that becomes acceptable. I just have the fact that I understand it now, and I didn't then, and the only honest thing I can do with that is say so. The silence between them was different from any silence they had shared during the marriage. During the marriage, the silences had been full of things unsaid. The conversations they were both avoiding, the questions he had stopped asking, and she had stopped offering answers to without being asked. This silence was empty in a different way. Clear. The kind of silence that exists after something has been said completely. Evelyn looked at him with the expression he now had a name for. It was grief. Not the acute kind. The settled kind. The grief of a person who has moved through something and come out the other side, and is standing in the place where the thing used to be, and feeling its absence with a specific adult clarity that doesn't require weeping because it's beyond weeping. Thank you for coming tonight, she said. I meant for you to see this. I needed you to understand what you were leaving when you let me walk out of that gate. She paused. Not as punishment, I want you to understand that. Not as punishment. Then what? As truth, she said. You deserve to know the truth about what you had, even if the knowing comes too late to do anything with. He looked at her face. He looked at it the way he should have been looking at it for 5 years. I did love you, he said. I need you to know that's real. Whatever else was wrong, that was real. I know it was, she said simply. That's what made it worth grieving. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she said, Go deal with Altieri, Luca. Go hold your organization together. That's what you're built for. Don't let it fall apart because of me. It won't, he said. Not because of you. She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to warmth that had existed between them all evening, and it lasted about 2 seconds, and then it was gone, replaced by the composed, clear expression of a woman who has made her peace with something and is ready to move forward. Goodbye, she said. Goodbye, Evelyn. She turned and walked back into the room. She walked with her shoulders back and her head level, and within 15 seconds she was absorbed back into the conversation of the party. Someone claiming her attention, her expression shifting into the public version of itself. And Luca watched her go until she was no longer visually distinct from the room itself. He stood alone in the middle of the Winter Legacy Gala with 200 people around him. Then he straightened his jacket, and he walked to the exit, and he went out through the ballroom doors and down the corridor to the elevator and down 40 floors to the lobby and out into the cold Manhattan night, and the cars were waiting. He sat in the back of the car, and he looked out the window at the city moving past. His phone rang. Caruso. Altieri's people want a response, Caruso said. The summit concluded 2 hours ago. They're saying the alliance is under formal review, but nothing's been voted on yet. If you move tonight, there's still room to set up the call, Luca said. Tonight. I'll talk to Marco directly. And the banking situation? Tomorrow morning, every remaining contact. I want to be in those conversations personally, not through attorneys. He looked at the city, the European deal, the logistics partnership. Get the amendment drafted tonight. We're cutting the clause and severing the Luxembourg connection before the week is out. That'll cost us in the renegotiation. It'll cost us more to leave it in place. He paused. And Caruso, the compliance review. Every structure she touched. We're implementing the corrections she left in the server. All of them, whatever it costs. A silence on the line. Then, you sure about that? She built those corrections to protect the organization, Luca said. Using them is the right call. It was always the right call. He looked at his hands in the dark of the car. We just should have been asking the right questions years ago. Caruso said nothing for a moment. Then, she was good. Yeah, Luca said. She was. He hung up. The car moved through the streets. The city was fully alive around him in the particular way that Manhattan is alive at this hour. The specific hum of a place that never truly goes dark, that keeps moving because movement is its nature, that does not pause for grief or triumph or the settling of old accounts. He thought about what she had said. You stopped being curious about me. He turned it over in the quiet of the car, and he did not flinch from it because the time for flinching was finished. The thing he had built his life on, the certainty that knowing enough about a situation meant controlling it, that power was a substitute for attention, that what you constructed mattered more than what you saw. That thing had not survived the last 2 weeks intact, and he was not going to try to rebuild it in the same shape. He didn't know yet what shape it should be. That uncertainty was new to him. He was not comfortable in it, but he was in it, and he understood that discomfort was not a signal to retreat. It was a signal that he was in actual territory rather than the managed territory he had been operating in for years. And actual territory was the only kind that meant anything. He had an organization to salvage. He had a coalition to renegotiate. He had a dozen financial relationships to rebuild from a position of reduced leverage. He had men who had stayed with him when they didn't have to, and he owed them the version of himself that was worth staying for. He had work to do. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus, and they started working. 3 weeks after the Winter Legacy Gala, Luca Moretti stood outside Prescott Tower alone. No convoy, no security detail. He had told Dolan he wanted an hour, and Dolan had looked at him with the expression of a man who had given up arguing about things that weren't his to argue about, and had simply said yes, sir, and stayed in the car at the end of the block. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The sky over Manhattan had been gray for 5 days, and tonight it had finally made a decision, and the rain came down cold and direct, the way December rain comes down in this city. Without drama, without apology, as weather rather than metaphor. He stood on the sidewalk outside the tower and he looked up at the building and he felt the rain soak through his coat, and he did not move. He was not there to go inside. He was not there to ask for anything or negotiate anything or attempt anything. Those impulses had moved through him in the 3 weeks since the gala, and he had sat with each of them and examined them and put them down. Because each of them, when he examined it honestly, was about his own need to have an ending he could control rather than her need to be left with the space she had built for herself. He was there because he needed to stand in the rain outside this building one time, as himself, with no agenda, and feel the full weight of the life he had not lived. That was all. The lobby of the tower was lit behind the glass, a warm, steady light that came from somewhere deep in the building and made the glass glow like it was holding something, rather than simply standing between inside and outside. He could see the security desk and the 2 men behind it, and the elevator bank beyond, and 42 floors above that somewhere. Evelyn Prescott in her office, doing the work she had been born to do and had spent 5 years doing quietly for someone who did not have the eyes to see her doing it. He stood in the rain and he looked at the building for a long time. Then he took his phone out of his coat pocket. He opened the secure messaging application, the one she might have deleted, the one he had told himself she might never see. The last message in the thread was the one he had sent 3 weeks ago. "We should talk, please." And her silence, and then the gala, and then everything. He typed a new message. He typed it slowly, because he was not a man who communicated easily in this register, and the rain was making the screen difficult to read. "I understand now what I had. I understand what I did with it. I'm not going to ask you for anything. I just needed you to know that I see it clearly. All of it. And I'm sorry. Not as a transaction, just as the truth." He read it twice. He sent it. He put the phone in his pocket. He stood for another minute in the rain, and the city moved around him. A cab sliding past, a couple under an umbrella walking quickly, a man in a delivery uniform who glanced at him briefly with the particular New York expression of someone who has seen stranger things and will see stranger things still and does not intend to slow down for any of them. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, the application, her name. He stood in the rain with his heart doing something it hadn't done in years, and he opened the message. One line. "I know. Take care of yourself, Luca." He read it once. He put the phone back in his pocket. He stood in the rain outside Prescott Tower for one more moment, and he breathed in the cold night air, and he felt the weight of 5 years and what they had cost and what they had given, and the specific way that both of those things were simultaneously true and did not cancel each other out. And then he turned and he walked back toward the car. Dolan saw him coming and got out and opened the rear door without being asked. Luca got in. The car pulled away from the curb and into the Manhattan traffic, and the tower receded behind the rain-streaked window, and Luca Moretti did not look back at it. He looked forward. The city ahead was lit and vast and indifferent and full of the next necessary thing, and he was still here, and there was work to do, and he was going to do it. He had lost the one woman who loved him before he became anything worth loving. He understood that completely. He was going to have to live with that understanding for the rest of his life and carry it without letting it make him smaller, and let it make him instead more careful, more present, more curious, more willing to look directly at the things that mattered while they were still there to be looked at. That was not redemption. He did not believe he was owed redemption. It was simply the next true thing to do, and the next one after that, and the one after that, until the accumulation of true things became something worth calling a life. The car moved through the rain. Behind him, somewhere in the lit tower above the sleeping city, Evelyn Prescott sat at her desk and worked. She did not look out the window. She did not need to. She already knew what was out there, and she had already decided what it was worth, and she was already building the next thing. She had always been building the next thing. That was who she was. And this time, finally, completely, with no one else's name in front of hers, the world was going to know it.